to Crypto Clothesline. We're glad to be here with you. Hanging out the crypto laundry. Getting all the crypto info for you. Crypto Clothesline. Crypto Clothesline.
Howdy.
Hi.
I thought that was a good intro, a good way of saying hello when we're going to talk about cowboys and Indians.
Yeah, good idea. Lucky I didn't get all angry and jump into a tribe and get all defensive about my position on howdy.
No, that's okay, because you would have been hidden behind a screen with a keyboard and we'd never see each other face to face, so you could say whatever you like.
I could, and I could go on Telegram and say whatever I want.
That's right, and have really mean comebacks and know that it's highly unlikely from one end of the country to the other that we'll ever actually set eyes on each other.
Exactly, and that is how the cookie crumbles in the crypto community at the moment. It is hectic out there.
That's how the Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin maximalists, that's how they roll.
And you know what? It's not even just the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash anymore, because now it's sort of like the scaling divide, the big scaling war. SV, ABC, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin, and Lightning Network all in this massive intertwined debacle. And you know, I think the only way that we can resolve this is maybe to adopt the old sportsmanship rules that we have in like state of origin.
You mean sports people shit?
Well, look, it's pretty embarrassing. They're not playing very well. In fact, I think that a lot of people in this space that have been here for ages are embarrassed.
Well, you know, we've all talked about it with, you know, this lovely new Telegram group, and everyone was jumping on in droves. And then I'd just drop in there and go, oh, they're still talking about Bitcoin. Yeah. Oh, no, they're being rude. Okay, boom, I'm out. Next day, come back, have a little look. Oh, shit, they're still doing it. And the names were just the same, you know, with the odd bleep, you know, sent in from someone else. Like days went on. And there were even comments from people coming from overseas going, gosh, I've never seen these discussions in my country. Is this just something that do people talk about anything else?
Oh my God, you're so right. It's like a ritual. It's a ritual for everyone who is whatever team they're on, an evangelist, Bitcoin Cash evangelist, a Lightning Network evangelist, and it's a daily ritual. It's just, you can't get away from it. Maybe it is just in Australia. Who knows?
And it comes to mind, we just put to air that wonderful interview with Dr. Prash, and he talks about cognitive dissonance. You know, as I understand it and remember, he basically defined that as, you know, you not being able to see your own shit. No, he didn't define it that way. He had a far more eloquent way of doing it, but that's how I defined it. And you just cannot see your stuff. Like someone else has to point stuff out to you because you have these sort of psychological blind spots. These guys are driving with their eyes closed down a one-way street, all at the same time.
They are, and we had this article that I showed all through these Telegram groups called Divided We Fail, the Irrational Insanity of Crypto Tribalism from Kent Barton on Medium. It was so applicable.
I haven't read it, but I know that I'm going to put it in the show notes, but I saw the comments from people in response to it saying what an amazing article.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's anything new. It's from beginning of last year. But one of the really awesome parts that it outlines is that personal attacks and outright trolling make the environment uncomfortable or even untenable for newcomers. And in some forums, overt censorship stifles the free exchange of thought. And in extreme cases, some developers have even received death threats. So it just basically says this is not serving anyone.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you were in contact with a guy, I think from LA. He was actually an Australian guy, but you welcomed him into a fairly prominent crypto group, and that the back chatting and the bitching that he copped there, he basically pulled out within 24 hours, didn't he? He said, I'm not, like, why would I talk to you guys?
Yeah, I was pretty embarrassed about that because he is my friend, and it was a group with a lot of people from my hometown in it. And you know, I invited him in and they ripped him to shreds and called him all sorts of things, including a scammer. So on a positive note, he's hosting a massive event in LA and we're going to be media partners. So all good.
Divided we fail, but together we shimmy. I mean, we create incredible stuff when we work as a unit. It's an age-old problem. I mean, you know, within the meditation world, they would say, like, if you can't even kind of get along with your partner, how do you think world wars are created? It's the same shit on a different scale. And, you know, if you can't have harmony and a meaningful resolution of conflict between two human beings, how on earth are you going to achieve that between two countries? And in this case, we have a fairly small community. You know, it's not many people having these discussions all around the world. And if those egos are too big to be able to actually absorb new information and shift a little bit into ideas which perhaps don't quite fit their ethos, you know, like, whatever, guys.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, this is a 2-part series on Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and all of Bitcoin's babies, SV, ABC, the Lightning Network, and it's all about the troubles that are going on in the crypto space at the moment because of all the scaling solutions. But one of the things that we interviewed Lucas Cullen and Lien Truong, who are the stars of our 2-part series this week. Lien actually said that when Roger Ver was asked what the difference is between SV and ABC, he simply said, not very much, mostly just the egos. So I found that really amusing, and in this interview I do add a little slice of what Roger Ver had to say as well. But in this 2-part series we also have other people coming in to give their opinions as well, including Herman Schoenfeld from Pascal Coin Foundation and Hayden Otto, the executive editor from CoinSpice and also the face of Bitcoin Cash, it appears, in Australia. We also had Brendan Lee, who is the Bitcoin SV face for Australia and a crypto expert. So on top of that, we got to speak to JP Parker, who was our first guest on the Clothesline, and she was speaking on community. So the next couple of weeks are going to be really epic in all of the material that we've sourced to make this 2-part series really incredible.
I think another comment was made, and this comment just has made me laugh out loud, but if you think about their demographics, you probably don't have that many women in the group. You certainly don't have older women, perhaps a little wiser, a little bit more reflective. And this comment was like, do you know the reason that all this stuff is going on is because there are all these young guys that are full of testosterone, and they're the ones punching the keys in the keyboard. They all want to be right. They're all riding that crest of hormonal wave of life in a time when you're in your 20s and 30s and you think you're invincible. And it's only with time and you get a few blows from life and you get a few moments where you have to get up and peel yourself off the wall and get back up into the flow of things that you realize that, you know, maybe you were wrong, maybe you need to chill out a bit. And a lot of people never get that reflection. So
what camp are you in then, BT?
Am I camp? I did read something that I really related to recently, and it said, despite all of these other factions around Bitcoin, the number one favorite all-timer at the moment for most people in the space is Bitcoin, whether it was the originator, whether it was a sense of feeling a little bit safe in a space full of dodgy ICOs. Yeah, so I tend to be a bit of I'm not a maximalist. I like to look into different things, but if I have some spare cash, I'll just grab some more Bitcoin. I don't go and grab anything else.
Wow, that's good to know.
Well, I think I'm the kind of person like you. We've often said on the podcast, you're the researcher. Sophia Mutt, she's an incredible researcher. I get articles sent to me by people like you and Soph. They're amazing articles. I skim them. I don't actually go deep. I don't feel like I have capacity to really look at what it all means. I tend just to keep going and work with what I've got.
Well, you're not a maximalist, but there is still a war going on, and you might be enlisted, a BT.
Oh gosh. But on that note, where do you stand? I wanted to ask you the same question. What you got out of it?
Oh, it depends. Do you want to know what the psychic told me, or do you want to know the logic approach to how I'm holding things?
Oh, we're going to lose a lot of listeners telling people that. Go on.
Look, she was pretty good. She was spot on with like nearly every single thing that she spoke about. And she was really fresh and green when it came to cryptocurrency, which was amusing. I didn't really know what the hell I was on about, but she did tell me just to steer clear of any new cryptocurrencies that are coming out, and whatever I'm holding at the moment, don't touch it. Just just leave it.
So I can hear the keyboard warriors asking this. So after all this debate and all this discussion and all this toing and froing of information, you're basing your decision on what a psychic tells you?
No, of course not. But it did, I guess, reinforce the position that I have at the moment, which is there's a lot of shitcoins going around and I'm not going to invest in anything until legit I know that it is a solution that will eventually be 110% peer-to-peer, decentralized cryptocurrency. And that's what I want out of this whole space. So I'm not going to go into anything until I can see that. And maybe she was right.
But I'm guessing as in terms of blockfolio, so to speak, you're probably already got some Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash stored. So you're playing both sides of the tennis court in that case?
Well, I've got a few things, that's for sure.
All right, moving right along.
Yeah, quickly, let's do it.
Let's talk about why we're here, Amy Rose.
Let's do it.
We would like to welcome you to the Crypto Clothesline Podcast. Our show is about helping women join the blockchain wealth revolution for themselves and for their families.
Our names are amy-rosegoodey and Abidi Catherine Pass. We're speakers in blockchain and crypto, and we're on a mission.
We're learning together with you. We're talking with leading experts in the space. We're exploring cutting-edge technology projects that are shaping the future for our children.
And this podcast is for intelligence and growth, and our values are for peace, harmony, and collaboration for the planet.
And never were those words spoken in a more interesting context than talking about all the bitchin' that's going on. So in the light of peace, harmony, and collaboration for the planet, let's have a listen.
Let's have a listen to Lucas Cullen and Lien Truong talk about Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and all Bitcoin's babies. So today we have Lien Truong, and she's head of growth in marketing at Hobby, and Lucas Cullen, who's a blockchain developer and the CTO of Civic Ledger, among other things. So thanks to you both for being on the Crypto Clothesline.
Hi, how you doing?
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So let's get started. There is definitely a bit of a war happening between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. This episode is not going to be a big debate. It's just going to be a few perspectives on what is happening and what the differences are between the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash communities and protocols and technologies and what differentiates them from everything else. So, Lien, you're going to be talking a little bit about Bitcoin Cash and Lucas should be talking about Bitcoin. But before we get started, Lien, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe a bit about Bitcoin Cash?
As you mentioned, I'm head of growth and marketing at Hobby Australia, which is a subsidiary of Hobby Global, one of the largest cryptocurrency exchanges in the world. I entered the crypto space a few years back in 2016, where I picked up some Bitcoins because a friend talked me into it. They're like my best friend now.
What a good friend.
Yeah. I thought they were crazy back then, but, you know, it all turned out all right. But I never really did anything with it until about early 2017 when I jumped onto a small trading competition where I came in last place because I discovered derivatives trading at 100x leverage, and 100x is never a good idea. But I do tell myself that the goal of joining that competition was to go out and meet people in the space and to learn a bunch of things really quickly. So I'm pretty sure I came out a winner there. From trading crypto, I became quite obsessed. And this only amplified at the end of 2017 when cryptocurrency boomed. And during that time, it became, you know, all about making fast money and flipping ICOs. I felt like it was a little bit of what you'd feel if you're in Wall Street, but it was in my living room and I was in my pajamas. So about 6 months ago, I was asked to join the Hobby Australia team. Because I traded and because I come from a product background. And ever since then, I've been traveling interstate and overseas, running events to promote not only the platform, but also cryptocurrency and blockchain, and in turn, gathering intel from users to better improve our exchange. Yeah, so it's really a dream job.
Wow, that sounds fantastic.
So in terms of Bitcoin Cash, put really, really simply, it's a result of a Bitcoin hard fork. In layman's terms, it would be, in a nutshell, a clone of Bitcoin and an altered version of Bitcoin. It's like a carbon copy with a few changes. So it still has everything that Bitcoin is, like it's decentralized peer-to-peer electronic cash system that's permissionless and requires no trusted third parties, etc. But it includes some changes, which some may call improvements, with the most significant one being that the block size was initially upsized from 1 megabyte to 8 megabyte. And I say initially because the Bitcoin Cash hard fork happened August 2017 and has since then undergone another hard fork or a couple of other hard forks and has increased its block size to 32 megabytes.
So just before we go into that, it's not, we have a real mixture of listeners, from people who are seasoned experts to people who've never heard of any of these things before. So could you go back and talk about what a fork is, please?
Okay, so Bitcoin is run on a blockchain, and what happens is to create blocks or to validate blocks or add blocks to the blockchain, there are miners who validate each block to make sure that they're true and correct. But Bitcoin, when it was created, it had all these protocols and rules set into it that, like, let's say half the Bitcoin community think that should never be changed. And the Bitcoin Cash community thinks that no, because technology is changing, we need to increase the block size, because right now, if there's a lot of transactions happen on the blockchain, then it gets really congested and really slow and sluggish. So we want to change it. Usually what happens is there are a lot of hard forks that happen in Bitcoin, but if the parties can't come to a consensus, what sometimes happens is that half the community will say, all right, we're just going to split this chain or, clone it. Or like double it, like make a copy of it, and then go in our own different directions. One, let's say in this case, Bitcoin keeping its current or all the rules that it has since the start, and one saying that we're making a clone, but we're going to, make some changes to the rules, and therefore becomes two separate coins. If you were on the original Bitcoin blockchain before the split, when it did split, what would happen is you would get the same amount of Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash as you had before the split.
All right. So to put it simply, a fork is when you basically clone the coding of the Bitcoin blockchain and create something different with a different name and with added features.
Yes, or just changed features. Yep.
Changed features. Okay.
Lucas, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on at the moment, and explain Bitcoin in layman's terms?
Okay, so for those listening at home, I've been running the Bitcoin Brisbane meetup since March 2013. I've been playing around with Bitcoin since 2011, software engineer by trade, and I was working at a few banks at the time when Bitcoin came about, so I got interested in it, and started following it ever since. Some of the projects I'm working on, I've pivoted more into the Ethereum space. We have these discussions on Telegram quite a lot. So I actually was the Cullen ambassador for Australia back in 2014. So Cullen is using the op return code in Bitcoin to store arbitrary data in, which is basically a link to a JSON file, so we can start to put little contracts or little assets in the Bitcoin protocol. And as I try and explain to the Bitcoin Cash maximalists, that what took me a month of engineering to do, you can do in Ethereum in about half a day. So from an engineer and as a person who delivers software to clients, I just felt the Bitcoin protocol wasn't competitive, so I pivoted more into Ethereum. So now I write a lot of smart contracts for a lot of different people around assets and provenance and all kinds of different use cases. Doing one at the moment around dog lineage, so verifying bloodlines of dogs using ERC 721. So there's all kinds of mixed bags. So that's a bit of background on me.
Oh, wow. I'd love to talk to you about the dog lineage on blockchain. That sounds awesome. Can you tell us, what is Bitcoin? Like, what happened in this hard fork that created Bitcoin Cash? What's it all about?
Yeah, so you did ask what is Bitcoin, and I think people don't understand that Bitcoin is really a protocol. It's not an implementation, it's a protocol. The white paper defines a way that software can create a currency and trade between untrusted third parties. So I think we really need to understand the difference between what's a protocol and an implementation. Now, an implementation is something like Bitcoin Core, which adheres to that protocol. And I guess to explain what a protocol is it's a set of rules that govern how the system works. I like to make the analogy like poker. When you sit down, you all agree you're playing Texas Hold'em, the blinds are this, and we all understand that protocol of the game. And, even in poker, we can have disputes on what we think is fair and ethical and within the rules of the game, but basically defining that protocol. So to make changes to the protocol, there's two ways, as you've mentioned and Lien tried to explain. There's hard forks and soft forks. Hard forks are generally not backwards compatible, where soft forks are. So the question really becomes down to what is right. So that's a very hard question and very hard answer, because what some people think are right, ramifications, being backwards compatibility, etc. So when the community can't decide what the protocol changes are, then they have the right to create forks and champion their own vision of what they believe the correct protocol should be, or the improvement to the protocol. So back in, as Lien said, back in August 2017, there was a group that wanted bigger blocks to arguably get more transactions per second through, which has technical merit. Some of the Bitcoin community didn't like that, arguing that that would decrease the amount of revenue that miners would make. So they created a fork, and they were well within their rights to do so. So then, as we mentioned, we've got 2 changes to the protocol. So if you're on one and you're not adhering to that protocol, then you're not actually part of that ecosystem.
So Lien, it's not just Bitcoin Cash that is a result of the original Bitcoin. We also, and I may even be incorrect in the way I'm even wording this because my mind is blown, but how did these other, we've got ABC and SV and so many more, probably. Can you tell us a little bit about how those came about?
There's Bitcoin Cash, which forks from Bitcoin Core, let's say. And then since then, Bitcoin Cash has been traveling along. And then again, the same thing happened where internally, let's say some of the team wanted to go in one direction and the other team wanted to go another direction. I know that the difference between, Bitcoin Cash ABC and Bitcoin Cash SV there were a number of things that they said made one more superior than others during the time leading towards the split of Bitcoin Cash this time. On one hand, Bitcoin ABC, that's led by Roger Ver, he was saying that it was going to be the most scalable and the most usable in regards to things like it'll have lower fees, it'll be the most extensible, where it'll allow people to build assets and smart contracts on top of the Bitcoin Cash blockchain, which allows for like non-cash transactions. Whereas on the other hand, with Bitcoin SV, which is led by Craig Wright, I think he disagreed with the non-cash transaction component of it, and he wanted to restore it back to the original protocol, the Satoshi protocol that was on the original white paper, while still making radical changes to the network, like still changing the block size even further and upgrading it to 128 megabytes. But since then, I think about a month ago, I was listening to an interview with Roger Ver, and I recall that when he was asked what the difference was between the 2 Bitcoin Cash ABC and the Bitcoin Cash SV, he said there was almost nothing different, and the fork was a result of, I think he said, a clash of egos more than anything.
I guess just to simplify things, what is the biggest difference between ABC and SV for people? So that way they kind of understand. Because a noob coming into this space, they're like, I give up. I have no idea what the hell this is. It's really confusing. So
yeah, even for the experts, you just feel like, oh, I give up. I don't want to deal with this nonsense. And so what's the difference between ABC and SV? That's the most frustrating part. The difference is almost nothing. Almost nothing. It was more than anything else, it was just kind of a clash of egos, if anything. The ABC group wanted to make a couple of improvements and updates right now, and then the SV camp wanted to make those improvements and updates a little bit later, and then the other improvements and updates they wanted to do in the reverse order. So some people wanted to do things right now and other things later, and the other group wanted to do it in the reverse order. It doesn't make hardly any difference at all, and it's really, really frustrating.
So I'm not sure if there was a pivot in the plans for the 2 projects to now be regarded as almost identical, according to Roger. But yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Yeah,
it's a really interesting thing because we there is a lot of media that covers all of these forks and these changes and what have you. And I'm not a person who really understands the deeper movements in the technical world, but it does seem to be a lot of people fussing and fighting over information. Do you think that it's a valid thing? Or do you think that people are doing this to be right? Do you agree with Roger Ver about the ego clash?
I have a marketing background, so I think it's marketing in a sense. Like the difference I find between Bitcoin and the Bitcoin Cash is that Bitcoin seems to be run by the community and it gets promoted by the community, whereas marketing for Bitcoin is quite fragmented, and it's really just playing off the fact that it was a first mover and it's the first Bitcoin currency and there's prestige behind that. But when it comes to Bitcoin Cash and its marketing, let's say strategy, they have huge personalities behind Bitcoin Cash ABC and Bitcoin Cash SV, where there's faces to these brands who are constantly in the spotlight and constantly creating content and telling us why they're the best. So I think, yes, it's fine to have competition, and the fighting is fine because it's probably marketing and getting it viral and getting the word out there. But it's one of those things where if it starts to impede on the progress, because essentially these two projects have the same goal of creating economic freedom for people, and if it starts to impede on their runway or their path towards that, then maybe it's not good. So, I'm on the fence where, yeah, it's good to watch, but if it's really like, getting in the way of them progressing towards the ultimate goal, then maybe it's not great.
Lucas, can you comment on the like when the networks are really busy, when there's a bull run and Bitcoin is going exceedingly slow? Can you comment on how that can be alleviated as an issue? Because it seems to be one of the things that Bitcoin Cash is trying to address. How can that be fixed in a way which is not going to mean we have to start off with a new scam coin, as you've been suggesting?
Yeah, well, I mean, these aren't new computer science problems. You just got to think of it like a pipe, and the internet is the classic example of a pipe or a freeway. You get bottlenecks all the time. So what do? Do you build the lanes wider to get more cars through per hour, or do you maybe increase the speed? So there's lots of different ways to try and scale, and both, as like I just mentioned, are correct ways to scale. But there's always in engineering a trade-off. So if you increase the block size, it reduces the fees, arguably, because there's more bandwidth on the network. So on one side, the consumer may pay less fees, but the people who are running the network, the miners, are going to get a reduction in revenue. And if we go back to the Bible of the white paper, like these religious freaks go on about, then it actually does mention that the miners will pivot into making being sustainable off fees, not off block reward. So sure, increasing block size will increase throughput and transactions, but at what cost? And who is going to be the loser out of that equation? And, like I said, no one will ever win. So who is it for? Is it built for, peer-to-peer transactions where the consumer wins? Or do the miners who secure the network have a bigger say? And these are the philosophical questions. The technology is irrelevant.
All right.
Yeah, I think it was really good to have a good overview of what Bitcoin Cash and what Bitcoin actually is and why this scaling debate is happening, and obviously like why it's causing such a big divide. And also as like the beginning episode of how all of these things came about is, I think, essential for this two-part series.
Yeah, it was an interesting discussion. I think Lien had a very sort of gentle overview of the whole thing. She was quite firm, and she's clearly got a trading background, so she understood what she was talking about. It was a very different approach because Lucas is also known to be quite straightforward and quite a straight shooter. So even there, they weren't unfriendly, but there was some very direct hits, in the disagreements, or perhaps not disagreements, but just in clarifications.
Yeah, that's what I love about Lucas, though. He's a straight shooter and he doesn't muck around. And what I find really quite impressive is the fact that he's still around, even though since 2013 he's seen these divides in the community, which must frustrate him to no end being witness to this.
Yeah, I really like Lucas. I mean, I remember when we met in the panel that JP was moderating at Block Conscious, and everybody else was fluting on and going down their symphonies, talking about this and that and how blockchain's going to change the world, and he just came up with one dry one-liner, which basically shook everyone else up and went, "Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, we need tech developers to actually get this shit done. Yeah, all right, good, moving on."
Yeah, and we also spoke to someone else who's in Brisbane, Brendan Lee, who is basically the face for Bitcoin SV for Australia, and he's a massive promoter on the Brisbane scene and throughout the country. And he came on to have a little bit of a chat with me about the history of Bitcoin and the series of events that led to Bitcoin SV. So it was a pretty cool conversation. But let's have a listen to what Brendan Lee, the face of Bitcoin SV, had to say in the interview. Thank you so much, Brendan Lee, for joining us. Brendan, you are a crypto expert and you are also the Bitcoin SV Australian rep. That's what I'm calling you, but what do you call yourself?
Thank you, first of all, for having me on your show today, Amy Rose. I like to call myself a proponent of Bitcoin SV. I advocate for Bitcoin SV as the version of Bitcoin that, scales properly and is really focused on becoming the global cash network that Satoshi laid the vision out for in his white paper.
Awesome. We're going to be talking in the interview about the various forks from Bitcoin, but because you have such an interest in all the various different currencies that stem from Bitcoin. Can you give us an overview of what Bitcoin SV is, what Bitcoin ABC is, and even what Bitcoin Cash is?
Sure. So Bitcoin was created in 2009 by Satoshi Nakamoto. He left the project early in 2011 and handed the keys to a gentleman named Gavin Andresen, who then brought onto the project a bunch of people who then went on to form the Bitcoin Core development team. And so these guys actually pushed Gavin off the project and then began to implement software changes that actually limited the way that Bitcoin would scale moving forward into the future. So in particular, the 1 megabyte block limit that has been so controversial throughout history. In about 2015, 2016, the argument was really starting to heat up about undoing that limit and letting Bitcoin scale the way that it was originally meant to scale. So there's a lot of comments from Satoshi in his original forum posts and emails saying, look, Bitcoin is going to be something that is run from data centers. It's going to be a network run by corporations. It's not designed to be something that you have that everybody runs a node at home or anything like that. You know, users are users. Miners are corporate entities who operate the Bitcoin network for profit. These arguments really began to come to a head late in 2016 when you had a group of miners getting together to form a mining pool that was going to reject a bunch of changes that the core developers were proposing, which included segregated witness. They were going to scale the network on-chain, but on the BTC chain. And what happened was, before that was able to take place, Bitcoin ABC was formed, and the Bitcoin ABC software client was created and used to create a split in the network. So you had Bitcoin fork off and implement segregated witness. They've kept their 1 megabyte blocks. And so then you had Bitcoin Cash with its 8 megabyte blocks.
Yeah.
And so Bitcoin Cash then scaled in May of 2018 and actually went up from 8 to 32 megabyte blocks. And so at that point, we were actually able to achieve, transaction volumes, in the millions of transactions a day. And as part of the team doing the stress testing on Bitcoin Cash network, we put a lot of effort into proving that could be done. And we actually did prove that it could be done. But then towards the last half of last year, so after the 32 megabyte upgrade, we started seeing a lot of disagreements about how the subsequent upgrade should go. So the November 2018 upgrade, we had two camps. So essentially they split the network, created two forks. So now you have Bitcoin Cash, which is headed off in its own direction. They're now implementing proof of stake systems for transaction consensus and all this kind of stuff. And Bitcoin SV, which is purely focused on laying down a bedrock and then scaling to enable, next generation finance. And so that's where we are today. We have Bitcoin SV. So there's actually been a new version of Bitcoin SV that's just been released. We've been testing that on their testnet for the last several weeks, and we've seen extremely good results in terms of being able to generate big blocks. So we can generate basically 64 megabyte blocks all day. We can generate a lot of 128 megabyte blocks, not yet consecutively all day, but I expect that certainly before November, we will be in a situation where we can do, well above 512 megabytes, which is where we will be by then. So things are moving very quickly. People are using new capabilities of Bitcoin SV to do all kinds of really cool stuff.
Well, thank you so much, Brendan, for coming on the show to tell us the story of how SV came about and ABC and Bitcoin Cash.
Thanks, Amy Rose.
Can you summarize his thoughts in 2 or 3 sentences?
Well, you know what I thought was really juicy is some things that I didn't actually know. And when he was talking about the history of Bitcoin, he talked about Satoshi's original vision. And one of the things I didn't realize is that Satoshi, in a lot of his comments on forum posts and stuff, he said, look, Bitcoin is going to be something that is run from data centers. And when Brendan said that, I'm like, wow, that sounds pretty centralized. How'd they get that out of the Bitcoin white paper and whatever? But then I found an original Satoshi quote, and it said that the design supports letting users just be users. The more burden it is to run a node, the fewer nodes there will be. Those few nodes will be big server farms, and the rest will be direct client nodes that only do transactions and don't generate. So he just basically went on to explain that with all of this debacle, eventually Bitcoin was going to be run by corporations, and then all these big escalations happen and all these wars like we're seeing now. Bitcoin was like, no, we're going to stick to 1 megabyte blocks, and then Bitcoin Cash was born, and you know the story from there.
Is that therefore saying that Satoshi foresaw that there would be these issues?
You know, I wouldn't even call them issues. I just think that this is just the way that Bitcoin is, and it's simply just a protocol. I don't think that there's any issues with it. It just is the way that it is, and it's all the people and the miners and the community that are getting up in arms and getting all defensive about, you know, who's better than who. But what Brendan was really saying is that really the corporations are going to run the mining pools probably, and this is where SV was born, and they're trying to do things that other people can't. But you know, the really interesting thing here is that it doesn't matter what camp you're in, there's still this argument that whatever solution you have for scaling is decentralized, and then there's more of a look into the solution, and then you realize once you sort of know what you're looking for that in fact these scaling solutions aren't decentralized. So it does take away a little bit from the vision really that we all had at the get-go, that cryptocurrency was going to be decentralized and maybe even free us all, which is a bit bollocks now, isn't it? Really, just the thought that could even happen.
So, this whole question of centralization versus decentralization and this weird irony that perhaps at the end, I think this is what I understand from what you've talked to me about Herman's conversation, is that with Lightning Network, we're actually heading towards a much more centralized model.
Yeah, look, when I spoke to Herman Schoenfeld, who's the CEO of the Pascal Coin Foundation, he's a developer from the get-go, so from the early days of Bitcoin. And I basically wanted to have a chat with him about how the Lightning Network works and why there's a divide in the community about whether or not it is a good scaling solution. And one of the reasons he explains is because we all want a decentralized payment system, or some of us do. We may be living in La La Land, but that's a general consensus that a decentralized payment system is the best outcome. But unfortunately, what he's saying is the Lightning Network is centralized. So what's happened is people are realizing that really the only realistic way that we can use a Lightning Network at a mass scale is to have custodial wallets, so something like having our crypto in Coinbase. And what that actually means is people won't be able to own their private keys anymore. Basically like having your money in a bank. You sort of don't really own your money anymore, they do.
And so with the Lightning Network, even from the name alone, I'm guessing that implies that it goes a lot faster. And it's a lot less cumbersome than the original Bitcoin one.
Yeah, I think so. And everything aside, it's a pretty exciting development. But let's have a listen to what Herman had to say. Welcome to the show, Herman Schoenfeld. You are here today because you're the CEO of Pascal Coin, and you have been a developer for blockchain since the very early days. Herman, there is a massive divide happening within our community, and it's causing a lot of grief to everyone involved. One of the big wars that's going on at the moment is the Lightning Network versus the Bitcoin Cash, and the debate on which one of these solutions is better than the other. It would be really good to have an understanding from a developer's point of view how it works. But before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then a bit more about Lightning Network?
Okay, thank you for having me on the show, Amy Rose. It's a pleasure to be on with you. So I've been in cryptocurrency since the very early days, around 2010, and I started to get into it at a development level around that time as well. And I used to work and build some infrastructure tooling for Bitcoin. And over time, then I discovered Pascal Coin, and that was an interesting project which I got very heavily involved in. Since then, I've become one of the core developers of Pascal Coin, as well as the CEO of Pascal Coin Foundation, which oversees the Pascal Coin project. So I do a lot of things in crypto, not just Pascal Coin, but also I'm involved in Bitcoin. I run a service called blockchainsql.io, which is a SQL database for Bitcoin, and it allows companies to convert their blockchains into SQL databases.
Thanks, Herman. Can you tell us a little bit about the Lightning Network and how it works, and even perhaps why you think it might be causing such a divide within the community?
Okay, great question. Okay, so it's really a multifaceted issue, and you can look at it technically, economically, and socially. And the main sort of issue that one camp has is not so much at a technical level; it's more on how it has been used, how it's impacted the underlying Bitcoin BTC network. So, first of all, when Bitcoin started, it started to get a lot of adoption, and people really started to use it. And then as more and more people started to use it, it kind of grew exponentially. It hit a limit in its ability to do transactions on the blockchain. And it was expected that the blockchain capacity would be increased in order to onboard all those millions of new users that wanted to use Bitcoin. But what we found out was that a certain set of core developers decided to kind of freeze the blockchain capacity, and they delegated the scaling capability to this concept of the Lightning Network. So the Lightning Network, when it first was proposed, it wasn't really for scaling Bitcoin. It was for doing micro payments. So, for example, if a content provider wanted to charge 1/10 of a cent for every time someone viewed their page, the web page, they could do that with the Lightning Network. That was the primary use case of the Lightning Network. But after the Bitcoin blockchain reached maximum capacity and it couldn't scale anymore, the opponents of the Lightning Network reframed their technology as a scaling solution for the blockchain. And that's where the issue started, because a lot of people said, well, Lightning Network, it's unproven, it's still not developed, it's going to take a very long time to develop. So let's not strangle the blockchain now. Let's increase its capacity to onboard those millions of users, and then when Lightning Network is ready, then we can start to use that and see if it works. But what actually happened was that they said, no, we're just going to leave the Bitcoin blockchain fixed at 1 megabyte blocks, which really limits it to about, say, 5 transactions per second. And then we all now have to just wait in our hands until the Lightning Network is finally ready. And when it first came out, like 5 years ago, the concept, it was promised, it'll be ready in 18 months. And 5 years later, we're at the point now where it's still going to be several years before Lightning Network is usable at any sort of, realistic level for ordinary users.
Now, there's also a conspiracy around the fact that the Lightning Network is a way to centralize the Bitcoin blockchain. Is that something you can elaborate on?
Well, when Lightning was first proposed, it was supposed to be this instant decentralized payments network, what's called the layer 2 payments network that sat on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. And that was the original promise. But what's happened now over time is that people are realizing that the only realistic way we can actually use a Lightning Network at a mass scale is to have custodial wallets. That means that people won't actually own their private keys anymore. They'll pretty much delegate those keys to a third party that will act pretty much in the same way that a bank acts today, and they will have the custody of those funds and provide you access to it via some other mechanism like a website or an app or something like that.
So a little bit like Coinbase?
Yeah, it's basically like having your coins on an exchange, except it'll be a Lightning node.
So then we're back at square one then?
Well, I mean, in many ways, that's the way it seems. So a lot of people then think, well, that you could take a conspiratorial angle on that and say, well, if a big banking actor or a government state actor wanted to co-opt Bitcoin, this is what it could possibly look like, because they're converting Bitcoin back into the old banking system again.
Well, thank you so much, Herman, for coming on the show and explaining to us how the Lightning Network works and why the community is a little bit worried about this technology.
Anytime.
So, gosh, episode 1, we've had so many different people commenting. We've had Lien Truong, we've had Lucas Cullen, we've had, we mentioned Dr. Prash, but we had Brendan Lee and Herman Schoenfeld. And we even had a little mention from Rog. So, delightfully complex episode. Next week's going to be interesting too.
Yeah, look, next week we're going to be talking about the community, and we're going to be talking about how embarrassing it is sometimes, but also the benefits of being involved in a system that can fork. We can participate in 2 sides of the coin, pardon the pun. We'll be talking about who's going to win mass adoption, marketing, and maybe even how to stop the infighting.
So we've done the pain and, you know, creating the pain in this episode, but we'll give the solution next week.
Is there a solution? Who even knows?
Just stay off those Telegram groups, girl.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, although I did have one lovely lady, who shall remain unnamed, say to me, well, it's so lovely that Amy Rose is in there and just trying to fix things. She's so sweet.
But it's such a waste of time. All of the fighting, all of the trying to fix the problems, all trying to make everyone happy and be friends and cuddle and love each other. It's just a waste of time.
Yeah, but somebody's noticing, so something's happening. It's usually another woman, though, unfortunately. Because the guys are too busy pouring the BS out of the way so they can get on with their fight. You know, I am right. No, I am right. No, you are wrong. And I am right. Let's talk about this again tomorrow. I am right.
It's becoming a little bit of a disaster, but let's all try and work together. This is what this 2-part series is all about. It's all about bringing to light all of the debacles that are happening at the moment and why it's all a bit ridiculous.
Okay, well, I shall see you next week.
Catch you on the flip side.
Bye.
Here comes the money.
Here we go.
Here comes the money.
Join us for the money season on Crypto Clothesline Podcast, April 27th, 2019.